Hey dear restless mind, tonight we slip with you into the echoing stone corridors of Persepolis on a warm spring evening in 482 BCE, when the scent of crushed cypress clings to your sandals and the torchlight paints gold flickers across the bas-reliefs of kings, courtiers and winged guardians. You pause at the threshold of an audience hall where nobles murmur in Old Persian, their voices low with anticipation because royal decrees are being whispered. Decrees you have no business overhearing, and you probably won't survive this if anyone notices you inching closer. The air is thick with smoke from frankincense burners. It curls around your face like a warning and an invitation at the same time, drawing you deeper into a world where belief, purity, and power are intertwined in ways your modern brain might find, let's say, morally spicy. Before we wander further into this labyrinth of ancient lore and cosmic duty, tap that like button, settle under your blanket and let your eyes get heavy. Tell me your location and local time. It's always fun to see where in the world you're time travelling from, and as always, sleep softly, wander bravely, and trust the history to hold you. You glide forward now, no headings, no fresh introductions, just continuation, as you step past carved immortals and slip into the heart of a belief system that try to stitch human behaviour directly to the cosmic fate of the universe. You're beginning with Zoroastrian cosmology, because without it, nothing else in this story makes sense. The ancient Persians didn't wake up one day and decide, hey, let's legalise family marriages for fun. No, they acted inside a world where every gesture, every marriage, every ritual, every bowl of barley set before a sacred fire was wired into a cosmic battle between Asher, truth, order, and Druj, chaos, corruption. To live well was to strengthen Asher, to live wrongly was to feed the Druj, and you, wandering through these corridors, can almost feel the way that moral weight shaped lives. A priest passes you now, robes rustling, his beard smelling faintly of ashes. He's clutching a small bundle of balsam twigs, ritual instruments symbolizing harmony between the natural and spiritual worlds. You don't get a manual, but if you did, it would explain that maintaining cosmic order sometimes demanded behaviours modern audiences find eyebrow-lifting at best. The Persians believed purity radiated outward from the family core. The more tightly that core was guarded, the more stable the universe became. You know, no pressure, so you listen to the priest's chant and let it wash over you. He murmurs about Kavait Vadatha, the Avestan word usually rendered as next of kin union. Don't worry, you're not about to be recruited. But you are going to learn why this concept existed without passing judgment the way someone might in a late-night group chat. In Zoroastrian theological logic, reuniting members of the same bloodline reinforced an original spiritual unity imagined in creation myths. The first sacred couple? In some traditions, they were siblings, divine prototypes whose union established the human race. If the cosmos began with a pure union of kin, then repeating that pattern wasn't seen as scandalous. It was seen as sacred symmetry, a cosmic callback, like the ancient version of referencing a meme only the initiated understand. You find yourself drifting closer to a carved relief showing Ahura Mazda, the supreme deity, extending a ring of kingship to Darius. This isn't a casual high five from the heavens, it's a visual manifesto. The king's authority comes from divine order, and because kings were embodiments of Asher, their blood had to be exceptionally pure. This is where royal kinship obligations start tightening around your ankles like invisible silk cords. Imagine being born into the Achaemenid dynasty. Congratulations, you now live inside a perpetual cosmic job description. Your marriage cannot simply be romantic. It must anchor the universe, protect the throne, and affirm your legitimacy. Keeping the royal bloodline concentrated wasn't just vanity, it was theology, politics, and risk management wrapped together like Persian flatbread around a very spicy moral filling. But don't mistake ancient cosmology for a dry textbook. It shaped real choices. Step through another columned doorway, and you overhear two administrators tallying lineage records. They're not gossiping. They're verifying whether a proposed union meets purity expectations. In this world, kinship isn't a casual background fact. It's a bureaucratic category that gets inspected more often than you check whether your phone is at 3% battery. And here's your first gentle joke. You realise that, unlike you desperately swiping away low battery notifications, ancient administrators had no idea how much future historians would obsess over their marriage charts. If they knew, they might have been neater with their handwriting. Now walk outside into the courtyard, where the mild desert breeze tastes of dust and roasted barley. You notice a noblewoman adjusting her veil near a mosaic-lined pool. Her marriage prospects are more than personal. They're cosmically consequential, politically strategic, and astrologically timed. In her world, marrying a cousin or even a sibling isn't framed as forbidden. It's framed as participation in cosmic repair. You catch her eye, and she probably wonders why you look like you just heard a plot twist in the worst historical soap opera ever. This is where you start appreciating the subtlety of Zoroastrian purity laws. They were not simply about marriage. They governed everything from how water must be treated to how corpses were handled to how fires had to be tended. Purity was a lattice that structured daily life. And if the universe was fighting a multi-millennial battle, then maintaining doctrinal consistency mattered. A lot. You move toward a group of young acolytes practicing recitation. Their teacher corrects one boy's pronunciation of Ashavahishta, the truth aspect, with the same exasperated tone a modern tutor uses when someone keeps mixing up there, and there. The cosmic enemy may be the drudge, but bad grammar is apparently a close second. The teacher explains that humanity's duty is to help Ahura Mazda complete the creation through acts that amplify truth, purity, and order. And while he doesn't explicitly mention marriage laws in this little impromptu TED Talk, you understand now. If something reinforced order, even if it looks strange through a modern lens, it became a spiritual obligation for certain classes, and this leads you back to the royal families. Their unions weren't ordinary, they were ritualized, debated by priests, and justified in texts as contributions to cosmic strength. Some sources even claim such unions produced especially virtuous offspring, an ancient equivalent of saying, this is an elite build optimized for cosmic battle. Whether or not that's accurate, you can feel how deeply that belief shaped behaviour. As you wander further, the evening crowds thin. Servants scatter fragrant petals across the floors in preparation for a ceremony. You recognise a pattern now. Nearly every element of palace life is charged with symbolic meaning. Even the positioning of lamps corresponds to purity traditions. This is a world where the metaphysical stakes of each action are high enough to make your last-minute tax filings look like casual doodling. You pass by a low table covered with scrolls, legal texts, genealogical records, ritual prescriptions. One parchment describes the qualities expected in a righteous ruler: self-control, generosity, devotion, and maintaining the purity of lineage. There it is again, cosmic responsibility in bureaucratic handwriting. You trace the ink with your fingertip. Don't worry, no conservators are chasing you, and you sense how firm the ideological foundation was. This wasn't a loophole or a scandal, it was the scaffolding of kingship. Now comes your second light joke. You realise that ancient Persian theologians were basically the original terms and conditions writers, except instead of burying boring clauses about data privacy, they casually tucked in instructions that shaped entire dynasties. Returning to the central hall, you hear musicians plucking strings as more courtiers gather. Discussions about land grants mingle with musings about omens. Someone references a recent comet, interpreting it as a sign of increased vigilance. See, even celestial streaks are folded into the fabric of moral duties. You take a seat on a stone step, letting the ambient murmur bathe your tired brain. You realise now that to these people the universe wasn't indifferent. It was responsive, structured, and morally reactive. And if that universe demanded kin union among elites, well, that wasn't controversial. It was obedience. As the night deepens, you follow a final corridor where braziers throw warm orange halos. A young royal scribe pauses in his work, rubbing his temples. He has been calculating genealogies for hours, likely confirming whether a proposed marriage keeps the lineage aligned with purity obligations. His exhaustion feels familiar. You've also questioned your life choices at 2 a.m. over much smaller stakes. like choosing between watching one more episode or being a responsible adult. At least your decisions don't determine cosmic equilibrium. He glances up, muttering that the world must be continually renewed through righteous actions, and that's the last piece you needed. In this worldview, cosmic order is fragile. Human choices matter. And for the highest classes, the choice of marriage partner wasn't personal, it was metaphysical duty. You exhale slowly. The torches crackle softly. A few last courtiers drift away as the night cools. You've stepped fully into the mindset that allowed certain marriage customs to exist without scandal, justified by a powerful blend of religion, duty, and cosmology that shaped ancient Persia from the foundations up. You're still standing in those dim corridors when the narrative glides forward. No new beginning, just your footsteps leading you deeper into the machinery of an empire where belief became law, and law shaped the most intimate corners of human life. The torches hiss softly behind you as you move into a smaller chamber where wooden shelves hold clay tablets, folded parchments, and seals stamped with the names of officials who lived and died centuries before your bedtime routine even existed. This, right here, is where Zwidoda leaves the realm of theology and enters the far less glamorous world of paperwork, policy, and state oversight. A young scribe sits hunched over a table, muttering to himself, tapping a reed stylus like someone endlessly clicking a pen during a boring lecture. He's tallying details because, in the Achaemenid and later Sasanian systems, kin marriages didn't just happen. They were documented, justified, and regulated. You lean in, not too close. You never know which ancient bureaucratic ghost gets offended by breathing space, and you watch him press a seal into wax. This little action is how a cosmic principle becomes an administrative reality. The scribe is copying a legal commentary from priestly authorities, texts that go on for paragraphs about purity gradations, permitted unions, and rituals required when a marriage shifts family lines. You see the phrase Zwidoda scratched again and again. It isn't whispered, it isn't scandalous. It sits openly in the legal discourse like a completely normal topic, more normal, honestly, than the tone some modern people adopt when trying to explain their tax deductions. And here is your first gentle joke of this section. You realise that while your own government makes you file taxes once a year, ancient Persian authorities basically made people file cosmological paperwork for marriage. Tough call on which is more stressful. You move closer, weaving between scroll racks, and notice something striking. These texts don't portray the practice as reckless indulgence. They depict it as meritorious, a good deed in some theological interpretations. The idea was that unifying the bloodline protected purity and prevented the intrusion of corrupting forces, an idea stitched tightly to Zoroastrian notions of moral order. Members of the priestly class wrote arguments justifying which combinations were spiritually optimal, often citing mythical prototypes, past kings, or divine permissions. Some Sasanian-era documents even describe rewards in the afterlife for individuals participating in sanctioned kin marriages. Not romanticized rewards, mind you, but moral credit, the ancient equivalent of leveling up because you followed cosmic guidelines. In this worldview, ethics, ritual, and domestic life weren't different categories. They were braided ropes pulling the universe toward illumination. A priest enters the room now, his robe shaking a faint trail of sandalwood. He approaches the scribe and asks whether a particular case has been reviewed. There's tension. Apparently a noble family is contesting whether their proposed union qualifies under purity laws. This isn't a soap opera. It's a legal puzzle, genealogical clarity, proper ritual sequence, approval from religious authorities, and confirmation that no political complications arise from merging estates. To the people in this room, the marriage is equivalent to a state project. You're watching bureaucracy decide cosmic merit, and honestly, that's a wild job description. You drift toward a wall where stone reliefs depict royal ceremonies. In one, a king and queen stand side by side, both wearing crowns shaped like flaring wings. This artistic symmetry emphasizes shared lineage and divine sanction. In those eras, the closer the royal blood stayed to itself, the firmer the throne appeared. Thus courts weren't just permitting kin marriages, they were sometimes encouraging them. If you keep the lineage enclosed, you also keep rivals out. That's not just theology, that's empire strategy. You step into another chamber where archivists sort tablets from different provinces. You overhear them quarrelling over a Sasanian text describing the role of judges in approving unions. Yes, judges. Marriages involving Zuidoda weren't a casual family matter. They had to be processed through legal channels, sometimes with witness testimony. The idea was to ensure no union contradicted purity laws or inheritance structures. Imagine if you had to bring not only a witness but also a priest, an astrologer, and a tax accountant to your wedding consultation. Suddenly your last-minute wedding RSVPs seem mercifully simple. One archivist lifts a brittle parchment and reads aloud lines describing desirable unions, including cousin marriages and in certain circumstances closer kin. The commentary isn't sensational, it's dry, almost comically so. You can practically hear the writer saying, "Here are the acceptable options. Please complete the appropriate ritual form and keep your fire altar clean." Across the room, another scholar examines doctrinal debates preserved in Middle Persian texts. Not every Zoroastrian thinker agreed on the specifics. Some argued for narrow interpretations, others broader ones. You hear him explain that theological discussions often framed Xuedoda as restoring primordial unity, but the legal system was more concerned about inheritance disputes. They had to decide who gets land, who counts as the primary heir, how do we prevent rival clans from claiming property through marriage. Stated plainly, cosmic order was important, but real estate was right behind it. You follow a group of officials into a narrow hallway where heavy wooden doors open into a clerical court. This is where disputes land when families disagree. You slip into the back as a hearing begins. A nobleman argues that his niece's proposed marriage must be approved because it strengthens lineage purity. Another faction argues that the marriage complicates inheritance lines and disrupts alliances. You watch a priest judge stroke his beard, glancing between ritual texts and administrative law. His job is to balance theology, family strategy, and regional politics, all before lunch. Someone in the front row sneezes, and the judge mutters a blessing reflexively, as if ensuring no stray impurity breaches the cosmic balance of the room. Here comes your second light joke. You realise ancient Persian judges dealt with marriage cases so tangled that even modern relationship status updates, it's complicated, feel refreshingly straightforward. After the session, you exit into a sunny courtyard where scribes dry freshly inked scrolls. One scroll details state procedures, who must approve kin marriages, what ritual offerings accompany the union, and which impurity protocols apply if lineage becomes muddled. You note terms like authorized, meritorious, and prescribed, suggesting these unions weren't rare exceptions. They were embedded within a regulated structure, shaped by doctrine and enforced by institutions. Walking along the colonnade, you encounter a priest teaching apprentices about the spiritual rationale behind Zuidoda. He explains that family unity mirrors cosmic unity. The primordial couple, symbolic ancestors, carried perfect purity, and reuniting kin symbolically restores that purity after generations of dilution. He holds up a bowl of consecrated water, describing how purity is strongest at its source. Mix it widely and it loses power. Keep it concentrated and it remains potent. It's a metaphor, and a persuasive one in his world. One apprentice raises a timid question. What if two individuals don't want the marriage? The priest sighs the way a tired teacher sighs when someone asks whether homework counts toward the final grade. He explains that duty sometimes outweighs personal desire, especially for those born into elite roles. Achaemenid and Sasanian ideology often framed royal marriages as obligations to the empire and to the divine. Personal romance wasn't the core, cosmic responsibility was. This doesn't mean everyone embraced the system. You hear murmurs of dissent in other parts of the court. Some legal commentators pointed out conflicts. Some nobles objected privately, and regional practice varied widely. But in official doctrines, Zuidoda remained part of the legal religious fabric. As you wander back through the administrative wing, you notice another parchment illustrating ritual steps. purification of participants, blessings over the sacred fire, recitations affirming unity with Asher. The rituals emphasize order, not secrecy. There's no sense of taboo here. Instead, there's ceremony, structure, and symbolism, like someone took a theological concept and built an entire legal machine around it. Outside, the afternoon light fades into amber, glinting off bronze vessels. Two officials debate whether a new decree from the king might affect the classification of kin marriages in distant provinces. One jokes that he'd rather wrestle a wild ass than update every local law code. You empathise. Updating software terms is a burden already, let alone updating cosmic marriage regulations across an empire the size of multiple time zones. And now your third gentle joke, you note that even ancient bureaucrats probably dreamed of a select all, apply changes to every region button. Alas, they only had sandals and determination. You begin to sense the machinery behind Persia's marriage customs. Texts, priests, scribes, judges, rituals, decrees, all interlocking gears shaping what was permissible or even encouraged. This wasn't chaos. It was administration with a theological backbone. As the torches reignite for evening, you pass once more through the Hall of Archives. Your eyes linger on the rows of scrolls, realizing that each one contains a fragment of human lives, shaped by the doctrine of a Widoda. These laws didn't blanket the entire population evenly, and their interpretation shifted across time, but in the highest corridors of power. The practice was undeniably state-sanctioned, legally processed, and cosmologically framed. You step outside beneath a deepening violet sky. The smell of burning myrrh drifts from a nearby temple. Somewhere inside, another priest recites words affirming purity, order, and the unity of creation. Somewhere else, a marriage is being evaluated, not for love, but for what it does to the cosmic ledger. You exhale into the cool evening, feeling the weight of law, doctrine, and order circling your thoughts, like dust rising from ancient stone floors. You've now seen how Widoda operated not as rumour or myth, but as a regulated institution shaped by clerics and statesmen who believed the universe depended on their rulings. You drift onward without a pause, letting the last chamber of legal debates fade behind you as new corridors open into a broader, more political landscape. The air smells different here. Less of ink and scroll glue, more of polished stone, hot metal, and the faint spice drifting from the royal kitchens. You're entering the realm where doctrine meets ambition, where cosmic purity becomes a strategy, and where Swedodar stops being merely a religious ideal and becomes a tool of consolidation in an empire that stretches farther than your phone's roaming plan would ever tolerate. A carved relief dominates the wall to your left, a king seated on a throne, attendants holding sunshades beside him, and rows of tribute bearers approaching with gifts. Gold, horses, textiles, and creatures you sincerely hope are not alive inside those baskets. But what catches your eye is the subtle symmetry of the royal family carved behind him. Same posture, same garments, same facial structure, an intentional artistic echo of lineage purity. Ancient propaganda wasn't shy. You step closer. A court historian stands near the relief, explaining to a group of junior officials that royal kinship wasn't just tradition, it was dynastic insurance. Empires this large were fragile, held together by loyalty, fear, road systems, and a shocking amount of paperwork. The historian recounts how rival claimants were always lurking at the edges of legitimacy. If the ruling house fractured into too many branches, rebellions sprouted like weeds. Keeping bloodlines tight minimized this political risk, or at least that was the intended effect. You can't help but think of modern family group chats, messy, chaotic, and constantly in danger of emotional meltdown. Now imagine those chats controlling armies, satrapies, and tax logistics. Suddenly, keep it in the family feels less like a moral slogan and more like a desperate attempt to prevent a civil war every other Tuesday. You follow the historian's voice into a spacious hall where banners embroidered with winged discs sway gently overhead. Court officials are rehearsing a ceremony affirming loyalty to the king, and you notice something subtle. The ritual script repeatedly emphasizes legitimacy through shared ancestry. The message is clear. Royal identity is sacred because it carries a distilled line of divine favour. That line must remain protected, consolidated, and unchallenged. One elder official leans toward a younger one, whispering about the dangers of diluted lineage. In his view, alliances through marriage with external noble families risked empowering other lineages to stake claims on royal authority. Intermarriage within the royal clan avoided this problem. The logic isn't romantic, it's pure statecraft. If marriage is a political contract, then choosing a partner from within the family is like merging accounts to prevent hostile acquisitions. You wander down a marble staircase into a quieter courtyard where two royal advisors are engaged in a heated debate about succession. The issue? A prince with strong noble alliances outside the core family threatens to form a power block capable of challenging the heir apparent. One advisor argues that strategic kin marriage would neutralize the problem, folding those alliances back into the central bloodline. The other suggests the prince should simply be assigned to a distant province with challenging terrain and insufficient cell reception, well, the ancient equivalent, so he won't pose a threat. You can't help cracking a small smile. Even empires must manage family drama. As you walk, you begin noticing how deeply political consolidation penetrates daily governance. A steward examines a genealogical chart, tracing branches with intense scrutiny. Certain lines are highlighted, those belonging to the most trusted inner circle. These are the families permitted, sometimes encouraged, to marry among themselves. The goal? Keep estates unified, loyalty concentrated, and political influence predictable. This strategy drastically reduces the chances of external families gaining footholds in the royal circle. Your first gentle joke of this section slips in here. You realise the ancient Persian version of gatekeeping your friend group was considerably more intense. Instead of unfollowing someone silently, you just didn't marry outside the cosmic VIP club. Moving on, you enter a council chamber where satraps, regional governors, have gathered. Their armoured guards stand like statues near the walls. A debate is unfolding about regional revolts. One satrap argues that stability begins at the top. If the royal house appears unified and pure, loyalists throughout the empire align themselves more securely. The mere image of an uncontested, divinely sanctioned bloodline serves as a psychological anchor for millions living across deserts, mountains, and fertile plains. A crack in that image, he warns, invites opportunism. This is where the political rationale behind Zuidida shows its sharpest edge. Royal kin marriages limited the creation of competing bloodline claims, simplified succession, and reinforced the message that the ruling dynasty was spiritually distinct. Political consolidation wasn't guaranteed, but it was at least structurally defended. You notice a pile of war reports on a nearby table. Rebellions put down, satrapies reorganised, tribute shipments delayed. It's exhausting just reading the summaries. Imagine trying to run this empire without tight control of the family that rules it. Suddenly the idea of limiting marriage partners doesn't feel mystical. It feels like crisis avoidance. Yet political strategy wasn't the only factor. Identity played a major role. Elite Persian families, especially during the Sasanian era, viewed themselves as custodians of not only the state but also the moral universe. Their lineage symbolised divine favour and cosmic order. Maintaining that lineage internally carried performative power, demonstrating continuity with ancestral kings and mythic prototypes. A king claiming descent from the divine couple had a sturdier ideological foundation than a king who married outside the lineage and risked diluting that symbolic capital. You stroll through a long colonnade into a balcony overlooking the expansive palace complex. Below, nobles circulate like pieces on a strategy board. You hear bits of conversation drifting upward, concerns about succession, complaints about distant governors, gossip about who is being considered for politically significant marriages. One noble remarks that uniting estates through marriage often creates unwieldy power blocks, unless the estates remain within the same family. His companion nods knowingly. This is the exact problem Widoda aimed to prevent. Your second light joke is born here. You decide that if ancient Persia had invented relationship status buttons, it's for political consolidation would have been trending. Descending back to the ground level, you find yourself in the training yard where young aristocrats practice archery. A commander supervising them explains, to no one in particular, but loudly enough for you to hear, that loyalty is strengthened when lineage is unified. He gestures toward palace towers, reminding the trainees that every dynasty weakened by internal competition eventually fell prey to rebellion or foreign conquest. If royal marriages consolidated power rather than dispersed it, that dynasty stood a better chance of longevity. You walk further, passing a garden where cypress trees rustle in the breeze. Two royal women sit under a canopy discussing estate management. Their conversation is measured, careful, and deeply aware of how marriage decisions affect political standings. One confides that she worries about alliances shifting too quickly. Another reassures her that strict adherence to lineage purity guidelines keeps estates anchored. These women are not passive participants, they understand their political weight. A marriage can stabilise a province, a remarriage can trigger a dispute. Their lives are part of governance. You move toward a pavilion where military commanders meet with court officials. Maps are unfurled. Borders shift with small pushes of the hand. A general argues that no empire survives long when the ruling lineage fractures. His example: other ancient kingdoms weakened by rival siblings or competing branches. Persia's strategy, he claims, is to avoid fragmentation through carefully controlled marriage practices. Whether you agree or not, you can see the internal logic. Unity at the top radiates downward. A treasury official nearby calculates estate consolidations resulting from kin marriages. His abacus clicks with the determination of someone who has learned the hard way that money and marriage rarely stay separate. But these calculations matter. Unified estates prevent rival families from amassing land that could support rebellion. Consolidation. Stability. Your third gentle joke lands here. You can almost hear him muttering that cosmic purity is fine, but he wishes someone would purify the bookkeeping system first. As the sun lowers, painting the courtyard in tangerine light, you reflect on the complexity of what you've witnessed. The political reasoning behind Huidoda wasn't a side note. It was a stabilizing mechanism. For the royal house, for the priestly elite, and for the sprawling empire straining under its own weight, controlled marriage practices helped maintain structural integrity. You watch a royal guard close the gates for the night. Somewhere inside the palace, an advisor delivers a sealed scroll to the king, a recommendation for approving yet another union that reinforces the central bloodline. Somewhere else, a noble grumbles about his limited marriage options. And across the empire, millions of ordinary people remain unaware of how these elite decisions shape the political winds dictating their lives. You exhale slowly. The empire hums around you, a living organism kept in balance by rituals, bureaucracy, and strategic unions. And now, stepping back into the shadowed hall, you understand why political consolidation was not just a factor behind kin marriage. It was one of its primary engines. You move deeper into the palace complex without breaking the narrative thread, leaving behind the echo of political councils and entering a quieter wing where the concerns of everyday life drift like faint incense through the air. This space feels different, less monumental, more lived in. Stone benches sit beneath arched windows. Stray scrolls lie half-rolled beside cushions where servants rested between tasks. You're beginning to understand something essential. Even though elite kin marriage shaped dynastic stability, the everyday social reality of ancient Persia was far more layered, uneven, and human than the stark legal or theological texts suggest. People lived within systems, yes, but they also interpreted, negotiated, ignored, or quietly bent those systems according to their circumstances. You step into a long corridor that overlooks a bustling residential courtyard. Women carrying baskets of wool laugh with each other. Children race along tiled paths, and a potter shapes clay jars while humming a tune so off-key it might qualify as an act of rebellion. These people are not elites, they're artisans, traders, farmers, attendants, ordinary individuals whose lives weren't governed by the cosmic anxieties that burdened the royal classes. For them, marriage wasn't a metaphysical duty, but a practical arrangement rooted in economic stability, family alliances and community expectations. Cousin marriages were common, yes, but that was true across many ancient cultures and still is in parts of the world today. As for the more extreme kinship unions described in priestly commentaries, they were far from the norm among common families. You linger near a group of women spinning yarn. They speak of a neighbour's upcoming wedding, a union arranged between distant relatives to keep land within the family. This is ordinary endogamy, the kind that has nothing to do with cosmic purity or royal propaganda, and everything to do with preserving property. No one mentions Swidoda, no one references divine prototypes or theological incentives. They're more concerned about whether the groom will treat his bride kindly, and whether the families can afford a good feast. And for a moment, the heavy cosmology of earlier halls feels far away, replaced by the warmth of human hopes and anxieties. From a shaded doorway, a young shepherd whistles for his brother, urging him to hurry before their flock wanders off. Their mother calls after them to avoid the far stream where the water is said to be impure, not for cosmic reasons, but because everyone knows it's full of mud and mosquitoes. Practical purity, not doctrinal purity. It's a reminder that religious ideas may orbit everyday life, but they don't always dictate it. You wander into a smaller street where a market is unfolding. Vendors shout prices for pomegranates, dates, barley and copper trinkets. A travelling storyteller recites tales of heroes and divine beings, embellishing details for dramatic effect. Children giggle as he pantomimes a dragon battle. None of this hints at Swidoda. You realise that while elite and priestly texts emphasised ritually sanctioned kin unions, everyday Persians likely viewed those ideas with a blend of acceptance, distance, or even mild bewilderment, much like how people today might nod politely at complicated legal jargon without ever applying it to their own lives. Your first light joke breezes in gently here. As you watch two dogs chase each other between market stalls, you can't help thinking that these carefree creatures probably understood Persian marriage politics about as well as most commoners did. And honestly, that's reassuring. A little farther on, you encounter a domestic courtyard where an elderly man tends a small garden. He greets you with the kind of polite warmth found everywhere across centuries. A nod, a half smile, a gesture toward flowering herbs. He speaks about his grandchildren, proud of how they help with chores and memorize prayers. His stories reveal something important. Ordinary families valued stability, continuity, and respect for tradition, but they didn't live under the same ideological spotlight as royal houses. Marriage choices were guided by local custom, economic necessity, and community norms more than by high-level priestly theory. His granddaughter emerges, hands dusted with flour, asking if she should fetch more water. He nods and reminds her to take her cousin with her, not because of purity laws, but because, as he says with a wink, bandits prefer travellers who walk alone. You smile. Some truths remain timeless. You continue wandering, eventually finding yourself in a neighbourhood where wealthier commoners live. Houses here are larger, decorated with patterned stonework and carved beams. In one home, you overhear a family discussing a marriage proposal. The father prefers a union with a cousin to strengthen bonds within their clan. The mother worries about gossip if the young couple seems mismatched in temperament. A teenage sibling rolls their eyes, clearly unimpressed by all of it. Yet even in these discussions, no one brings up the specific term Gwidoda or the more intense forms of kin marriage described in religious texts. This is where historians must tread carefully. Ancient texts often reflect the ideology of the educated elite, not necessarily the lived practices of the entire population. You overhear a scholar in a nearby garden explaining exactly this to his students. Archaeological remains, household goods, burial sites, legal contracts don't suggest widespread sibling marriages among ordinary people. Instead, they show typical endogamy patterns and a mixture of social norms shaped by geography, tribe, economy, and personal preference. He lifts a shard of pottery etched with simple household markings and points out that these artefacts belong to communities whose lives barely intersected with royal policies. The theological writings may emphasize ideals, but the material culture tells a quieter, more grounded story about everyday Persian life. Your second gentle joke slips in as you notice one student stifling a yawn. You can practically hear their internal monologue. I signed up to study ancient empires, not ancient laundry lists. But that laundry, both literal and metaphorical, is where real human behaviour shows itself. Continuing your steps, you reach a small Zoroastrian fire temple on the outskirts of the district. The sacred flame burns low, tended by a humble priest who doesn't look anything like the high-ranking theologians of earlier halls. His sermons are practical, focused on kindness, cleanliness, respect for family, and devotion to Asha. When he speaks of marriage, he emphasizes harmony, stability, and cooperation, values recognizable across millennia. He doesn't mention kin unions. He doesn't cite complex doctrinal logic. His audience includes farmers, weavers, and overworked parents who want spiritual guidance that speaks to their actual lives. The priest notices you listening and smiles gently. He remarks that faith is lived in deeds, not in debates. This resonates deeply. It reminds you that while priestly elites shaped doctrinal formulations of Xwiduda, many everyday believers likely interpreted those teachings symbolically, respectfully, or distantly, without feeling compelled to enact them. As you walk on, the urban sounds gradually fade into a rural hum. You step into a village outside the city walls, where people are preparing evening meals. Chickens scatter, goats bleat, and children kick a leather ball across packed earth pathways. Here, kinship operates as a practical network. Cousins share harvest duties, uncles fix broken tools, aunts mediate disputes. Marriage within the extended family strengthens these networks. You see how this kind of endogamy supports survival, not cosmic theory. It's a social fabric woven from proximity, trust, and shared labour. A village elder recounts family histories while sharpening a tool. His stories mention cousin marriages as normal arrangements that maintain property and preserve alliances. When he refers to marrying close, he means close in community, not necessarily close in blood. He shrugs when someone mentions the royal family's extreme practices. That is their world, he says. Ours is different. His tone carries neither disdain nor fascination, just practical distance. Further along the road, you pass a group of travelling merchants. Their accents come from distant corners of the empire. They talk about how different regions interpret life, religion, and family. Some tribes prefer strict endogamy. Others encourage exogamy to build alliances. Some laugh at royal customs. Others respect them. The empire is enormous, and the variety of practice mirrors its geographic breadth. And here comes your third light joke. When a merchant complains about how confusing it is to track marriage customs across regions, another pats him on the shoulder and says, "Just smile and congratulate the couple, it works everywhere." As dust settles, you sit on a low stone wall watching villagers gather for dinner. The smells of stewed lentils and roasted onions drift through the cooling air. You reflect on everything you've witnessed. The gap between prescriptive doctrine and lived experience, the social class differences, the pragmatic choices shaping marriages, and the modern historians decoding all of it with care. From fire temples to dusty marketplaces, from noble homes to rural fields, you've seen that while royal kin marriages were legally and doctrinally significant, they weren't universal. Most people lived ordinary lives guided by ordinary customs, far removed from the ideological weight carried by palaces and priestly councils. And historians today, piecing together ancient texts, inscriptions and archaeological clues, understand that Persia was neither monolithic nor simplistic. Its marriage practices reflected a spectrum, from cosmic theory to everyday humanity. You continue along the dirt road beyond the village, the sounds of evening mealtime fading behind you, and the narrative flows seamlessly into the final stretch, where the world of ancient Persia begins to shift beneath your feet. The sky above you deepens into a deep violet, streaked with the last orange threads of daylight, A few stars blink awake. You walk toward an outpost where travellers gather around a fire, and as you settle near its warmth you start to sense the empire changing, its boundaries tightening, its ideologies bending, and its marriage customs drifting toward decline under pressures both foreign and homegrown. A group of soldiers sits nearby, polishing their weapons while talking about rumours from the West, Greek philosophers raising eyebrows at Persian practices, foreign envoys murmuring critiques behind polite smiles, and storytellers weaving exaggerated tales about exotic court customs. You listen, realizing that once the Achaemenid Empire collided with the Greek world, militarily, culturally, intellectually, it found itself exposed to new sets of moral judgments. The Greeks recorded Persian customs with a mixture of curiosity, misunderstanding, and occasionally spicy exaggeration. And because Greek literature became widely circulated, their interpretations, fair or not, gave later generations the impression that Zwidodeia was far more widespread than it likely was. You feel the subtle sting of cultural friction in the soldiers' voices. They joke about foreigners who wrinkle their noses at Persian laws while happily wrestling naked in gymnasiums. Differences go both ways after all. Still, cross-cultural contact planted early seeds of scrutiny, causing some Persians, especially those living near Hellenized regions, to reassess the public image of certain elite marriage practices. You walk farther and come across a caravan of scholars, merchants, and priests travelling toward Ctesiphon, the great Sasanian capital. Their conversation paints a fuller picture. One scholar explains that after Alexander's conquests, Persian elites increasingly absorbed Hellenistic cultural elements, art styles, administrative practices, even philosophical ideas. Exposure to Greek, Roman, and later Byzantine norms made the intense forms of kin marriage appear out of step with broader Mediterranean social values. It didn't transform society overnight, but it nudged Persia toward a more outward-looking perspective. A travelling priest beside him acknowledges that Zoroastrian doctrine had long defended Vedanta, but he admits privately that younger clergy were beginning to interpret the old texts metaphorically, rather than literally. He gestures toward the desert horizon, saying that the world itself was changing, new religions spreading, new ideas circulating, new audiences judging. Doctrinal flexibility, he argues, was becoming a survival skill. As the caravan moves on, you catch up to a Roman merchant squinting at a scroll by firelight. He mutters about customs in different provinces and shakes his head at the confusion. He's not hostile, just baffled, much like someone trying to decode their phone bill after a mysterious international roaming charge. Cultural misunderstandings accumulate fast, and once Rome became a major neighbour and occasional rival, Persian rulers understood that political alliances, diplomatic marriages, and international reputation required careful choreography. The road curves toward a stone bridge leading you into a bustling Sasanian town. Here the shift becomes more pronounced. Unlike the earlier Achaemenid world, the Sasanian Empire existed in conversation and competition with major world religions. You see Christian churches, Jewish communities, Manichaean gatherings, and later on mosques spreading after the arrival of Islam. These diverse groups brought their own ethical frameworks, each with explicit prohibitions against the closer forms of kin marriage described in priestly Zoroastrian texts. Inside a courtyard, a group of Christians discusses recent debates with local Zoroastrians. Their bishop emphasizes that marriage between close relatives violates natural law, a concept unfamiliar to older Persian cosmology, but increasingly influential in global moral discourse. A Zoroastrian elder listening nearby sighs, admitting the tension. What once symbolized cosmic purity was now being criticized as moral impurity. Competing religious values didn't merely introduce disagreement, they shifted what counted as socially acceptable behavior. You walk deeper into town toward a fire temple, where you overhear young Zoroastrian priests practicing recitations. Their teacher pauses frequently, emphasizing allegory over literalism. When he reaches passages historically interpreted as endorsing Zwidodeia, he explains that earlier generations may have misunderstood the intended symbolism. Unity of spirit, he says, does not always mean union of blood. You sense that reinterpretation is slowly replacing tradition, not through confrontation, but through gentle doctrinal softening. Outside the temple, a group of villagers chats about recent changes. They mention rumours that some local authorities no longer approve close-kin unions, even when powerful families request them. One elderly woman remarks that times are shifting and that certain unions simply feel old-fashioned now. Her tone suggests not moral outrage but quiet adaptation, the same way modern society grows out of certain practices without writing manifestos about them. As night deepens, you pass travellers resting near a caravanserai. A Jewish merchant recounts debates with Zoroastrian judges about purity laws. A Manichaean speaks of spiritual dualism and denounces elite marriage traditions as evidence of cosmic darkness. A Christian monk insists that such unions are incompatible with divine law. You notice that none of these people are political elites, but their conversations reflect broader cultural currents influencing Persia from the ground up. Ideas spread through roads, trade, argument, literature, and migration. And once a practice becomes contested on moral, religious, and intellectual grounds simultaneously, it tends to lose its institutional footing. Walking on, you enter a dim, torch-lit hallway of a Sasanian administrative building. Clerks shuffle through tablets, but something is noticeably absent. The detailed, heavily ritualized legal commentaries about Zuidada that filled earlier archives. You do see references, but fewer than before, and often noted with qualifiers or reinterpretations. One clerk mentions that recent rulings prioritize estate management, diplomacy, and social cohesion over doctrinal purity. Another mutters that approving close-kin marriages now invites more conflict than it resolves. The legal tone has changed from prescriptive to cautious, even reluctant. You step into a chamber where two judges debate a case involving inheritance. One argues that approving a close-kin marriage might create political complications with neighbouring families. The other points out that newer interpretations of Zoroastrian law favour moderation. The spiritual merit once attached to such unions is now debated, not universally assumed. Their discussion shows the transition clearly. The old theological framework still exists, but the institutional momentum behind it is fading. Outside, dawn begins to tint the sky pale gold. You find yourself walking alongside a river where fishermen cast nets with steady, practiced movements. Their quiet conversation reveals that the younger generation sees kin marriage, especially its extreme forms, as part of a distant past. Not forbidden, perhaps, but outmoded. It's like watching a cultural tide recede, slowly, subtly, until one day you realize the shoreline has shifted entirely. A final sign of change appears as you reach the outskirts of the city. A small school where children learn history, poetry, and basic ethics. Their teacher recites tales of kings and heroes but skips over the more controversial marriage stories, focusing instead on moral virtues, bravery, and devotion to truth. When a curious student asks why some ancient rulers married within their own families, the teacher answers gently that people of the past lived under beliefs we no longer follow. The class nods, accepting the explanation without shock or interest. To them it is merely history, no longer practice, no longer identity, no longer law. You stand under the growing light of morning, absorbing the full arc you've witnessed. Kin marriage in ancient Persia didn't disappear because of a single event, decree, or rebellion. It faded because the world around Persia changed, and Persia changed with it, through Hellenistic influence, competing religious frameworks, shifting moral expectations, evolving doctrinal interpretations, and the slow but undeniable pressure of social adaptation. What began as a cosmological principle and political strategy ultimately became a relic of earlier eras, replaced by new visions of family, purity, and order. Here, with the sun warming the horizon and the empire entering a new chapter, your journey through the rise and decline of Zuidada settles into quiet understanding. Wind down 300 words. Now, as you let the final images drift softly across your tired mind, The pace begins to slow, like footsteps easing from a long walk into a gentle glide. The noise of bustling markets, chanting priests and royal debates grows faint, folding itself into the soft hush of early morning light settling over ancient rooftops. You breathe a little deeper now, letting your shoulders loosen, feeling the story unspool from the grand halls of kings into a single, calm thread. Those distant practices, once shaped by cosmic duty and political calculation, drift away like parchment caught in a quiet breeze, leaving only the steady rhythm of your own breath in the stillness. The torches that once flickered along palace walls fade into a warm golden glow behind your eyelids. The voices of scholars, soldiers, villagers, and priests merge into a distant hum, softened enough that they barely brush the edges of your awareness. Even the weight of centuries, those shifting beliefs, evolving customs and fading traditions, settles gently now, no longer demanding attention, no longer pulled tight by conflict or curiosity. They simply rest, the way old stories do when they've been fully told. So allow the last traces of ancient Persia to soften and dissolve, like footprints blurred by desert wind. Feel the stillness seep in, stretching each moment a little longer, smoothing each thought until it drifts into quiet. You have walked through empires and ideas tonight, but now the journey settles into peace. Let your breathing slow, let your thoughts dim, and let the gentle calm wrap around you like a soft blanket. Sweet dreams,